Hello again, everyone. We're back again on a new episode of The Fact, the series that discusses international political issues every week. Today, we would like to talk about the Trump's approach in United States of America, and also his recent moves and his possible moves in the future, and also the probable situation for next election in the United States. We have three respected guests tonight with us. We have Mr. Mark Williams. He's an independent political analyst and activist from USA. And also we have Mr. Navid Nasr. He's also a political analyst and activist from Maryland. And also we have Mr. Salaam. He is a political activist and commentator from Japan. I would like to welcome all of you to the program. It's truly a great honor to have you on this episode of The Fact. I would like to start with the first question, which is basically about the amount of popularity of Trump in the United States. So I would like to ask Navid, do you think recently Trump is being considered as a desired president, or I can say a popular president of United States of America? And if so, why is that and why is not?
Before the Qasem Soleimani assassination or after?
You can actually talk basically now after the assassination of Qasem Soleimani.
Well, I will say this: anytime things like this happen, I can't speak from firsthand experience in other countries, but I, from living in the U.S. for as long as I have, anytime there's either sort of an amp up, a build up to a war setting, or if there's a declared or undeclared some sort of act of war, there's always media messaging that accompanies it, and there's also like a wave of I want to say patriotism, but it's something different than just normal patriotism that accompanies it. It's not necessarily love of country. It's there's a underlying sentiment that runs through. I don't know why I'm trying to parse my words here. I'm sorry. I'll just be frank. There's a kind of not just among the political elite and not just among the military establishment and the foreign policy establishment. Across the board, there's a kind of chauvinism that goes hand in hand with U.S. Foreign policy and U.S. politics that's difficult for a lot of people who aren't from here or who haven't lived here to really comprehend, particularly outside looking in. Because you would think, particularly when the stakes are as high as war, people would be more questioning, more skeptical. But it's almost, again, I've seen it time and time again, it's almost considered treasonous to not take off your thinking cap in times like this. And I don't know what the solution to that is other than just to push back against that thinking as hard as possible. I don't know if that does any good, but I don't know what else I can do personally. I've seen Trump's popularity among his base in the past week soar. I don't know how that translates into across the board, across the U.S. I think this time it's a little different than it was under Bush, George W. Bush, George Bush Sr., and Obama when they went into their military buildups, because they weren't quite as divisive a figure as Mr. Trump. And so there's going to be a good 45 to 50% of the country that's going to oppose him, not just slightly, but vociferously, no matter what he does or says. And so there's been a lot of pushback, including in corners that I'm not normally used to seeing in times like this, whether it's certain corners of mainstream media, whether it's with celebrities. I'm not used to seeing that kind of pushback when it comes to military action or build up to war. I'm seeing it. It's accompanied with a lot of hypocrisy and a lot of I don't know what liberal talking points about treason and Russian collusion and all that kind of nonsense. So, but it's pushback. His popularity is solid, I'll put it that way, among his base, more solid now than ever. But I don't think there's really much he can do to win over the people that are against him, and that's still a good 45 to 50% of the country. That's the best I can do in terms of summing it up.
So, Mark, I have this question basically, which might look like, it's like a funny question because some say that it's a hard question to be answered. But anyway, what are the achievements of Trump for the people of the United States of America? Can you actually say what truly he gave to the people of the United States?
Okay, well, I should preface this by saying that my primary interest is in war and foreign policy. So, in that sphere, from my point of view, from the point of view of my values, he hasn't done anything, quite the reverse. But in domestic policy, I believe that one thing that Trump did that was kind of good is he reestablished, or at least talked about, establishing the right of the federal government to negotiate with the drug companies on price, which is something that you have in the national healthcare systems of any other country, in Canada and England and probably Syria and probably Iran, for all I know. It's just like it's a no-brainer everywhere else in the world that the government gets to negotiate with the drug companies, everywhere where there's national health coverage, right? But in the United States, that's like a big deal. Like, wow, we don't just have to pay whatever the drug companies ask for. This is a revelation. So there are a few little items like that, but I really think that you have to keep in mind that Trump is really Trump's constituency was always a minority. He was elected by a minority of voters because we have this stupid electoral college system, which overrepresents or overweighs the votes of people in the smaller states. The joke goes that there are some states out in the West where there are 3 people and 2 of them are senators. So he's a minority president at best, right? And for the people who voted for him, a lot of their pleasure in having him in the White House is symbolic. That because we have a highly partisan sort of sports team mentality in this country. So, it's our guy, got into the White House and and the Democrats are out. So a lot of it's sort of tribal. It's not really based on any substantive thing that he's done. It's just the sense that your guy is in, And what's particularly strange about Trump is that his most enthusiastic base is evangelical Christians, and as a person, he could not be farther in his, in his religious or moral behavior or values or anything. He could not be farther from an evangelical Christian. So it's just really kind of a wizardry of some sort that he has become the representation of their team for the right-wing Christians. And the other thing that you need to know about U.S. politics is that the evangelicals never get what they want, except when it's what Israel wants. So the people in this country who are really enthusiastic about Trump, they are right-wing Christians. They hate gay people. They are anti-feminist. They're against all these kind of, there's a lot of stuff that's high on their list. They're very hostile to, the social issues stuff. They never get that when they get their guy. But one thing that they're really enthusiastic about is supporting Israel, and they always get that. So, So what we have is a very Israel-dominated political system in which the people, the billionaires, the small clique of hyper-billionaires who are fanatically pro-Israel, they cultivate the same foreign policies, they sell the same foreign policies to these two different teams with a totally different set of justifications. So for the right-wing Christians, they support Israel because supposedly the Bible says that you'll prosper if you support Israel, and that, they support Israel for the same reasons that they don't want, they're anti-feminist, and they want support liberal gun laws, easy access to guns, and all this other sort of social, cultural issue, more cultural than social issues. But the left traditionally, Zionism has been sold with a whole different rationale that appeals to liberals, like it's a national liberation movement. It's like the black civil rights movement. It's like the gay rights movement. It's like the movement to give women the right to vote, right? It's a particular group of people that were oppressed and experienced injustice and prejudice, and so liberal values are the underlying value that is behind liberal values is compassion, right? So when you want to sell support for Israel to the liberals, you try to portray Zionism as just another kind of justice movement, social justice movement, right? But then when you want to sell the Zionist movement and support for Israel to white nationalists, and militaristic people, then it's a totally different thing. It's like, support Zionism because it's cool, it's militaristic. It blows things up, it dominates, It's all about cruelty, the glorification of cruelty and militarism. So it's like this totally, they just pick a set of justifications, but the common denominator is support for Israel.
So Ali, I would like to ask basically this question about the, just analyzing recent moves that Trump has been doing since 2 years. He has pulled out from JCPOA. Also, he tried to transfer the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem, and also he tried to assassinate. Actually, he did order to assassinate General Soleimani. I would like to know that, is he trying to somehow increase his reputation for election, or he's just seeking some other goal?
Well, as far as the JCPOA is, first of all, as usual, I want to start in the name of Allah, the most beneficent, the merciful. His move in regards to the JCPOA needs to be looked at in a particular way, because a lot of people want him to actually re-enter the JCPOA, which would actually be mistaken, because the JCPOA was form of soft war against the Islamic Republic of Iran. It was a Trojan horse that would eventually weaken the Islamic Republic, its Islamic system, and the system of Vilayat al-Faqih, to the point where Imam Sayyid Ali Khamenei would become a symbolic leader at best, similar to perhaps, we put that as an example, as the Emperor of Japan post-World War II. So pulling out from the JCPOA wasn't necessarily a bad thing. And as Navid said, we have to look at the hypocrisy and the virtue signaling of some of Trump's liberal detractors to see that that they aren't necessarily really interested in respecting Iran's sovereignty, in respecting the Islamic system of Iran, or really respecting anything about Iran. They just want to put on a fake smile, come up with a handshake, and then stick a knife right in Iran's back when they're not looking. So they pretty much are only against the overt hard war of dropping bombs and missiles and everything like that. And I was actually listening to Iranian professor Mohammed Marandi on I forget which show say that Obama was no different when it came to cultural sites. Everyone's freaking out about Trump tweeting that he will target cultural sites. Obama literally created ISIS, and by proxy, Obama destroyed the cultural sites of Syria via the not-so-moderate Syrian rebels that he supported. So this false dichotomy is between the left and the right in America is very, very deceiving, and you have to be able to look a lot closer to see the reality. Now, as far as Trump's moves are going, he has been a very political anomaly for the United States. There are some people who believe that, for example, he is using a form of realpolitik or smart diplomacy, or as in the internet meme, 4D chess, is concerned because at the beginning he was opposing Obama's foreign policy, and then he went to the Jewish lobby and said, I don't need your money. So people thought that he might be the president to finally stand up to the Jewish lobby in America, but through smarter means, because we know the last president who tried to do that, John F. Kennedy, got his brains blown out in public for standing up against Israel's nuclear program. So obviously, if one wants to stand up against such a powerful lobby, they would need to tread carefully. But at the same time, there are people who are more skeptical about it. I myself am skeptical about it, but not completely. I can see why many neocons are against Trump, because he goes along with what they say, maybe 80%, but the other 20%, he's more Machiavellian, egotistical, whatever you want to call it. I don't say he's motivated by moral reasons at all. He's a very immoral man. He made his money off of gambling, and according to Islamic spirituality, which I ascribe to, that type of sin eats away at your soul and makes you a bad person anyways. So whatever he's motivated by, he's causing a little bit of a ruckus in the United States establishment. So that I'm kind of in the fence between the 4D chess activists and the people who say, oh, it's all puppetry. I think it's somewhere in between, but that doesn't make him a good person, and certainly the ends don't justify the means of certain things that he's doing. So pulling out of the JCPOA is actually good for Iran. As Imam Khamenei and Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah has said, that the one benefit of Trump is that he puts the true face of America out for the world to see. And even Bush, as callous as Bush was, he was never as openly hostile as Trump is. And that's why a lot of the neocons don't, because Trump messes up their PR game. But this assassination of General Soleimani, I think, really gets rid of the 4D chess argument in that extreme. Not to say that Trump isn't Machiavellian and doesn't act independently in a way that is earning him the neocons' wrath and is getting the whole Russiagate story behind him. But like I said, I don't think he's motivated by moral means. And while the assassination of General Qasem Soleimani, may Allah bless his eternally living martyred soul now, while it may have united the resistance axis, healed wounds between Iran and Iraq, brought the Palestinian resistance, not only unite the different factions together, but bring the heads of Hamas all the way over to Tehran to pay respects, which is very huge, and people should not discount that at all. And many other aspects. You have Russia coming in and paying respects, Russians driving with automobiles across near the U.S. Embassy with pictures of Qasem Soleimani, Yemenis, even Americans and Europeans standing up for Qasem Soleimani. That is, I believe, the power of God. That is not the power of Donald Trump, because they thought with this they can destroy the resistance axis and maybe get some quote-unquote stability and push in the deal of the century that they want to do. but it ends up working in our favor, and that's the way martyrdom works according to the laws of metaphysics. So, like I said, the 40 chess theory would say that, oh, he did it on purpose to unite the resistance axis. Well, harming a hair on that righteous man's head, the ends don't justify the means, if that is the case. But I don't believe that is the case. So whatever moves he's making is actually digging the grave of the U.S. empire and the Zionist world order. Full stop. This is the way God uses their arrogance against themselves, and it's going to end up working in our favor. So all these moves that he is making, I think like I said, it's going to help him in his election for a certain part of his base. But he's also neglecting a certain part of his base because his base is very split. Some of them think he was trying to go against the Zionist neocons and the deep state. But some of them are just average brainwashed Americans who hate Muslims and this and that and believe all the false flag lies and everything like that. So he's pandering more to the establishment brainwash base, and his other half of his base, they really have nowhere to go politically. They're not going to side with the establishment liberal, and there is no real third-party candidate for them to support. So I really don't know what's going to happen to the U.S. I really hope that George Soros doesn't take advantage of this civil strife and try to create more problems out of it. But at the same time, this is, the United States has done too much evil and is earning God's wrath. And Minister Louis Farrakhan has spoken about that. If they want to avoid, for example, more bad things happening, because there are a lot of good people who live in the United States and a lot of people who are oppressed by this deep state system, the Federal Reserve. So it descending into chaos would not be a good thing, and it would enable people like George Soros and other types of nefarious actors to manufacture whatever or take advantage of whatever crisis may happen in the United States. So whatever pot is being stirred by Donald Trump's actions, we will win. The resistance axis will win. The meek will inherit the earth. But what happens to the devils who have been running it? I hope at least the people who live under their rule will be spared from the chaos that may ensue from these people who want to keep the United States public distracted.
All right, thank you, Ali, for your explanation. You mentioned the assassination of General Soleimani, and that was very important. And that is basically, I can say it, one of the most important issues that happened in last decade. So I would like to ask Navid, do you think that assassination of General Soleimani and Abu Mahdi Mohandes would basically help Trump in the next election? It might you might have covered it in previous question, but I would go basically for this assassination if it will be helpful for Trump in the future, either in the election or either in his approach in the United States. And do you think he's basically trying to make a war with Iran, or it's just a show?
Whether the assassination itself will help him with his election campaign, it's again, this is a different situation with this president than with any other presidency that I've ever seen, as long as I've been alive, which is there's always been a kind of rally around the flag thing when it comes to any kind of hostility, war, provocative action, proxy war. It's been kind of like a we all speak with one voice kind of thing from both the establishment and the media. And this is the first time I haven't seen that. So we have, for example, Elizabeth Warren, tweeting out, talking about how Qasem Soleimani was an evil murderer, blah, 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 but then also saying that, we shouldn't let Trump push us into war. So that's new. again, I haven't. It's extremely hypocritical again on the part of these people, particularly since I think not so much his re-election campaign, but the impeachment is at least one of the huge motives for Trump in doing something like this. Other people have talked about it, the wag the dog scenario. Clinton did the same thing when he was under impeachment over the whole Monica Lewinsky thing. What did he do? He bombed the aspirin factory in Sudan and sent some missiles towards Osama and his boys in Afghanistan. So and that actually did serve its purpose for him to move the impeachment off the front pages, off the main topic of conversation, and it did, in fact, rally the political establishment and the military establishment and the foreign policy establishment behind him, at least for a time. It worked. I haven't seen, again, I haven't seen that kind of unanimity of message, and we all speak with one voice in the aftermath of this assassination. Everyone in the respectable commentariat is calling Soleimani an evil man and a terrorist, and blah blah blah. But at the same time, they're also saying that we can't let Trump rush us or push us into war. And Ali is absolutely right in terms of the hypocrisy of these people, because their impeachment proceedings, based really at core, the impeachment against directed at Donald Trump, is about his refusal to go along with their desire to send more arms to the Nazi junta that they put in power in Ukraine. That was what caused the impeachment to happen, not anything else, not Russian Facebook ads or whatever the hell else they want us to believe. So it's extremely hypocritical on their part now to not play along with this scenario, but it's good for us. It's good for the people of the world that the establishment, at least on the surface, seems to be so divided, so polarized, that they're more worried about how to go for the throat against each other than anything else. It's a good thing. It's good that the political establishment in the U.S. right now is more divided, more partisan, more genuinely hostile to one another than at any other moment that I've ever seen. It's a good thing because it means that things like a push to war are not going to be quite so easy to do. We use terminology a lot, terms that are familiar to us that we think we know what they mean. Things like fascism, dictatorship, things like that. But the fact of the matter is, unless there's some sort of open coup on the like an open military coup on the part of one or the other faction in the U.S., they aren't going to be able to start a war of the magnitude that they will have to fight against Iran without the backing of both the people and the entirety of the establishment. And so far, I don't see that as a realistic scenario. So I don't think Trump is going to be able to use this assassination in order to bolster his reelection campaign. And I certainly don't see a war happening. So no, I don't think this has helped Trump in that way whatsoever. I think if anything, the only way it has helped him is to push the impeachment proceedings to the background. And maybe that's all he wanted. Maybe that's really all he wanted. We don't know. Obviously, the whole 4D chess scenario, the whole QAnon maestro thing is a bunch of nonsense. But beyond that, this isn't going to help Trump with his reelection, but it's helped him in the short term, pushing the impeachment to the background.
Okay, thank you, Navid, for your explanation. If you go into more details about the the main adversaries or competitors that Trump will have in the next election, I would like to talk about that too. And do you think that he will have just any kind of problem or challenge in the next election?
There's a saying in U.S. politics that you can't beat something with nothing. And so the Trump's supposedly most likely challenger as the Democratic nominee is somebody like Joe Biden, right? And what you have is basically an offer of the same policies, especially foreign policies, but with a kind of with quibbles, with a certain reserve or something that's not really it's not an actual challenge to the underlying story. And that gets back to one of my pet peeves in the whole liberal the commentariat, which is that when they oppose a particular action, because they're afraid to oppose the liberal lobby, the Israel lobby, they usually fail to question the underlying narrative. So, for example, in the case of this assassination, what you're seeing is you are seeing criticism of Trump's action, but you're seeing dishonest criticism which doesn't question any of the underlying assumptions, only the action itself. So what you see is a lot of commentary that amounts to saying, well, yeah, it was this guy, that Iranian guy that Trump killed, Soleimani, was, of course, he was the actual embodiment of all evil, and we're all very glad that he's dead, and thank God for that, and I hope he suffered. But I wonder if it was the smartest thing to do. This is not a real alternative. This is essentially praising him with faint damnation. It's and so there's the people who question the underlying rationale, like we shouldn't be, for example, we shouldn't be luring people into diplomatic encounters, setting up diplomatic meetings and then killing the person that we've lured into this diplomatic meeting. And people, who point out that this person was actually the most effective opponent of these head-chopping, crazy sectarian terrorists in Syria and Iraq, the people that we claim to be fighting, and the people who would point out that we actually materially have been supporting the terrorists in Iraq and Syria, and that Israel supports them too. Israel treats ISIS fighters in its hospitals. Once ISIS accidentally hit Israel, lobbed a missile at Israel, and then they apologized. They apologized to Israel. This is how close they are. Those people do not get a hearing anywhere on the mainstream mediascape, right? There's nobody who and the people who even begin to address that, like the only person in either party, potential candidate in either party who has touched on those things a little bit is Tulsi Gabbard. But Tulsi Gabbard, even herself, has chimed in with the demonization of Soleimani after his death. She herself has been guilty of saying, well, Soleimani, of course he was a terrible person. He was just the devil on two legs. But gosh, it was terrible that Trump killed him, which makes no sense, So what you have is, and I totally agree with one of your other guests who was saying that the impeachment is so clearly a way of boxing Trump in and inducing him to stick to the most belligerent foreign policy possible.
I would like to go into the one of the main questions that we have, and normally people ask about it. Ali, do you think that eventually Trump will be elected by all these, history that he has made for himself? Do you think he will still have the, majority of the votes for himself?
He was elected as a response to the American public's rejection of the neoliberalism of Clinton, which is a reflection of her husband. She helped her husband to push the NAFTA trade agreement, which destroyed American jobs, also destroyed the economies of Canada and Mexico, essentially increasing the debtor nation status of the United States. Factories were shut down, things started coming over to China. Although that phenomenon was surely happening before, this really helped to accelerate that. So small towns in the United States became jobless or unsatisfactory economically. Contrary to the Hollywood image that many people think about America, the prosperity kind of really only exists in the major cities. Tucker Carlson recently did a report on how Zionist billionaire hedge fund manager Paul Singer came into one town in Nebraska, I believe, and basically bought out not a small, but a local fishing and outdoor goods store, and sold it to a larger chain of a similar style, and basically then crashed the company, which just in a sense crashed the town because the town depended on that company. So that phenomenon has been happening all across America. So Trump is really a response to that. In addition to the issue of mass migration, the overwhelming amount of people that are just given a green card like it's candy has really. Those are kind of two extremes of the spectrum on immigration. You have the keep them all out or let them all in mentalities on both sides, and both of them have their obvious flaws, especially because such a large increase in, for example, mass migration actually is directly correlated to the unemployment of Black and Native American populations. So I think there's a lot of division on both sides to kind of create chaos. You have racists on one side, and then you have ultra-liberal people on the other side. And because of decades of the ultra-liberal policy on immigration, people want to swing right to the other extreme and go to kicking them out, rather than finding a more reasonable approach to immigration that addresses both extremes. So Trump's election was really a rejection of all of that. And people thought, as I mentioned before, that Trump would have been a good counter to the neocons and the neoliberals. Now he has, as I said, in his Machiavellian nature, he does some things that are seemingly independent of neocon edicts and diktats, but at the end, he still does about 80% of their bidding regardless. So he has been still a disappointment. And on the major issues, he, whether he out of his own doings or because he has succumbed to the pressure of those deep state neocons and neoliberals and Zionists and what have you, he has not really fulfilled many of his promises. He wants to promote homosexuality around the world. He assassinates one of the most righteous men to ever walk the earth, Qasem Soleimani, and flip-flops on withdrawing troops from Syria, flip-flops on whether to fund or not fund the Takfiri terrorist rebels in Syria, and so many other things. And while there may have been some economic benefit because he is more of an economic nationalist than he is an internationalist, trying to, that these corporations prefer internationalism because then they don't have to have any loyalty to the United States. They can take a factory in Detroit, place it over in China. He's done some in that sense, but as far as pretty much everything else, it has been, for the most part, status quo. So a lot of the American publics are terribly misinformed. So they might just vote for him because of the rah rah America rallying cry, especially in the wake of this potential new war. But they're going to realize that this war has no benefit for American interests. He killed the man who defeated ISIS. Iran is only an enemy of the American Zionist-occupied government, not the American people. In fact, Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah has specifically said and repeated from things that he and other resistance axis figures have said before, that American civilians are not our target. The American people are not our target. The issue is the system of America, the arrogance of America, and the way they exert their power around the world through bloodshed and other forms of misery, killing women and children and everything like that. So when they realize that Iran is a formidable power, and Iran is going to retaliate formidably, very formidably, and we will see, inshallah, what happens in the coming weeks as they exact the hard revenge that is promised. And we will witness that the Iranian army and the Iranian revolutionary forces, unlike the Americans and unlike the Zionists, the Iranians are not going to be going around to various cities and slaughtering civilians in order to dominate. They will actually target those who are actually criminally liable for the assassination of Qasem Soleimani. That is American military installations and various political installations, except for embassies, of course, because those are supposed to be neutral in times of war. Except for the case we saw in Iraq, because embassies in the Middle East can often serve as spy dens. But that's aside from the point. They're not going to target civilians in America or diaspora Americans around the world. That will not be the case. So they know that the price will be paid in military loss. So they're going to get a real tough wake-up call of what happens when you let Zionists and bankers run your governments. The American people are going to get a real wake-up call what happens when you don't go by the principles of Jesus Christ, alayhi salam, and go instead the principles of the Pharisees and have that guide your country. They're going to learn things really quick, and I don't know what's going to happen in the election, because even at the end of all of this, even when they see the failures of many of Donald Trump's policies, people will still think that he is better than many of these liberal politicians that are running again. And again, as I mentioned before, many of them may condemn his attack and assassination on Qasem Soleimani, but it is entirely hypocritical. They always support soft war on Iran by sanctions or by the JCPOA, which makes them think that the United States is their friend, gets Iran hooked on foreign imports, and makes Iran not independent and not self-sufficient, so they can build Iran up through artificial means. And like a house of cards, whenever they want, they can say, oh, stop funding Hezbollah, and Iran says no, and then they cut off, for example, European imports. So that was the plan with the JCPOA, one of many plans, of course. So people are going to see the democratic choice as perhaps worse, because this model has been tried, even under Republicans, the model is still the same as many of these Democratic contenders. So with Trump, he's still more of a wild card, and for people like us, he might even be the best choice, because he's putting the true face on the American empire, and he is helping the American empire to dig its own grave faster. I don't believe he's doing so by moral means. I'm not one of the QAnon or 4DHS advocates. I believe he's entirely an immoral person, but in his Machiavellian nature, he is bad PR and bad optics for the Zionists and the neocons. So for someone like me, I see him as slightly better than these wolf in sheep's clothing liberals. But at the end of the day, I don't see where an aware, informed American person can go to politically, at least on the presidential spectrum. But I hope it doesn't, as I said before, I really hope it doesn't descend into chaos. What I hope is that the American empire, withdraws and then becomes an American republic and focuses on its own borders and its own issues and its own problems and serves the American people instead of slaughtering innocent people across the globe in order to fuel its house of cards economy, to feed its dying middle class. A lot of people think, especially among Trump supporters, even those who may oppose war with Iran, they still think that America should be number one in the world and should take resources by force. But when you eat on unlawful goods, that has a bad, God is going to come down on you and bring a bad outcome. So they think the American middle class will disappear without domination of the world. Well, that's not the case. If we want the American middle class to survive without having an empire, they should focus on the Federal Reserve and the bankers who have stolen the money of the American people and concentrated the wealth in the hands of a few banking dynasties that run America. They should focus on that because when you withdraw the empire, you can arrest these criminals, fairly deal with the Federal Reserve and its assets and its theft of the wealth of the American people, and then you will still have a middle class without having to kill babies in Iraq or assassinate righteous men of God like Qasem Soleimani.
Thank you, Ali, for your explanation. Okay, thank you everyone for your detailed explanations. Now, in case you want to add anything to this subject, I would be more than happy to hear it. So, Navid, would you like to add anything in case there was some, issues that were missed in this, in this talk?
The one thing I want to say is it's important to remember that it's been the exception, not the rule, that a president only serves one term. It's something extraordinary when that happens. When you look at the entirety of U.S. history, in my lifetime, Jimmy Carter was a one-term president, but Obama wasn't. George W. Bush wasn't. I'm trying to remember. Clinton certainly wasn't. Bush Sr. was, and there's all sorts of reasons why that happened. But it's always in favor of the incumbent that he gets reelected. It's extraordinary. It takes something really extraordinary for the sitting president to not get a second term. It's something. It just has something to do, not even necessarily with anything that person has done. It's in our psyche. Most of us were not hardwired for that kind of change so frequently. But it's the ball is in Trump's court, and I'll put it this way: the Democrats haven't done anything to really seriously challenge him with the prominent candidates that they put out there, Elizabeth Warren, Joe Biden. They have good candidates, good people running for office in Andrew Yang and Tulsi Gabbard, but their own establishment has done so much to kneecap and handicap those people and make sure that they're on the outside looking in. There's no way they're going to win a nomination, either of them, and so therefore, his supporters think one thing, but the reality is different. Bernie Sanders doesn't have a snowball chance in hell of beating Trump, and he's not the saint that his liberal, progressive, and quote unquote radical supporters think he is. Particularly on the foreign policy front, he's just not, and he never has been what they envision him to be. Or he's not an empty vessel. He actually has a proven track record on this issue. Not his rhetoric, but his record, how he's voted, the things that he said when it's actually mattered. Not opposition to war as some sort of abstract philosophical thing. So neither Bernie nor Warren nor Biden represent any kind of serious threat to Trump. And the one or two candidates who actually could represent a serious threat, their own party has turned their guns on. So they're not going to be facing off against Trump come election time. So Trump is I'll say 95% chance that Trump is going to win a second term, even if he hadn't done this. This has solidified his popularity with his base, only with his base, but it has solidified his popularity with them. But even if he hadn't done this, he would have still had a 95% shot at winning re-election. It's just, those are the facts.
Okay, thank you, Navid.
There's an interesting investigative reporter named Whitney Webb who lives in Chile. She's American, but she lives in Chile, and she has and she has done an investigative report for Mid-Press News that is a little bit worrisome for the prospect of, you know, whether the U.S. elections may happen at all, because she talks about how a very CIA-connected company has been doing simulations of U.S. elections in which supposedly terrorists attack the election system, and it has to be called off. And they've done more than one of these simulations, always ending with the cancellation of the election itself. Now she's very good. I've learned over the years to trust her investigative reporting. So that would be my parting thought, that this election is really a wild card, and it's possible that it might not happen at all.
Ali, would you like to add anything also to the discussion?
Sure. I just because I think it's so important to recognize the wolf in sheep's clothing. To just reiterate that Trump's opposition is not, necessarily the friend of the average American, nor of the oppressed people that they claim to be supporting, especially Muslims. So, for example, I know where Trump stands. As much as I hate him, as much as the blood of Qasem Soleimani has earned God's wrath, I don't. These people who claim to support Muslims, they want. I don't have kids now, but inshallah, when I have kids in the future, they want my children to go to drag queen story hour and see some grown man dressed in woman's clothing show his private parts to young children who probably shouldn't know what those types of things are until a later age. And many other things. Even their so-called anti-war or anti-Zionism is very weak at best. They are liberal Zionists at best. They support the two-state solution. They want the rapist, which is the Zionist entity, to share the bed with its victim, which is the Palestinian people. And also, the liberals can be very disorganized sometimes. Not to say that we shouldn't ally with certain people on the left, as there are certain very principled people who are on the left, but the majority of liberals are not among that crew. But even though they may come out in large numbers to these anti-war rallies, really it's just a call back to the JCPOA. It's a call back to the status quo, where America just puts out their right hand for a handshake, but in their left hand is a knife, and they're going to stab you in the back. So I think at the end, the people of America will choose Donald Trump to be reelected. And to be honest, as much as I hate him, but it's the reality. I can't shoot for an ideal. As much as I hate the lesser of two evils and support certain third parties, such as the Constitution Party, for example, it's just the reality. It's what we have to deal with. And there's someone like Trump who makes the empire look bad, who sails in choppy waters, and many other things like that. He's almost better than all the establishment being united together, sailing in the USS Empire on smooth waters and going in to do this or that and maintain unipolarity around the world. Now, what what will end the empire is not the U.S. elections. It's going to be this decisive response on the part of the Iranian-led resistance axis, which will drive the American presence out of the Middle East for good, inshallah. And we will see that once that happens, the dangerous, murderous presence of the United States government and the Zionist deep state, the satanic deep state that leads it, is not going to be able to have the power to cause misery, to cause bloodshed anymore, and the Zionist regime will be very vulnerable and very weakened. And God knows best. Maybe this will be the beginning of the establishment of a just and sane planet. And again, I hope that this can not lead to chaos within America, because if this leads to chaos, all kinds of nefarious actors will want to take advantage of the chaos to steer it in the proper direction. As many of these occultists who exist within the U.S. Deep state establishment believe in, they believe in this ordo al chaos, or order out of chaos, which is what they did in Syria, for example, by supporting the terrorists in Syria against the legitimate government. But my final advice to the American people is, don't just look to politics, because everything's a reflection of each other. If you have immorality in, for example, in your personal life, you're going to have injustice and immorality in political life. It's a reflection of each other. So the abandonment of moral values in society, whether when it comes to sexual ethics or how we treat each other or the selfishness and individualism of the United States society, first of all, it's not Christian. If the United States wants to claim it to be a Christian country, it has gone far away, and it's very much aligned with the Judeo-Masonic values of its founders. So to really have a true, thorough political change, first it has to start with a spiritual and moral change. Hopefully the Christians of America, the real Christians, the ones who are not Zionists, such as Mel Gibson or Michael Hoffman or our mutual friend Mark Glenn, or the hosts of True News out in Florida, Rick Wiles, to really restore the soul of Christianity that has been so far secularized it is unrecognizable. I think when that happens and they restore the morality, you will see that ripple effect happen on the greater society. The inside is the reflection of the outside. I think that's a universal principle. That is something people around the world can learn from politically, that we need to focus on our own. We cannot call for justice in the outside world when our personal life is in a mess. How we treat our spouses and children and our neighbors and everything like that. So the American people need to look as much inward as they do outward. And if that happens, they will be able to crash land the sinking ship or the crashing plane of the American empire, crash land it down safely into the American Republic. But that's a pie in the sky dream, and that's a long shot. But I'm putting that seed out there for it to perhaps grow in the minds of whatever Americans might be watching this. So, like I said, hopefully the situation with the Iranian response will be victorious, and that the American people will wake up and want to not fight any more wars for Israel, so they don't end up in the body bag, as in the Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah has warned Americans that this is what will happen if you believe in following this sinking ship, which is not even in your own national interests.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, we have come to the end of this episode of The Fact. I would like to thank everyone for accepting our invitation to this program, Mr. Navid Nasr, and also Mr. Mark Williams from USA, and also Mr. Ali Salaam from Japan. It was a true honor to have you on this program, and also I'm really thankful for your detailed and informative explanations about the subject. Hope to have you again on next episodes, and goodbye.